Today we continue on with our NHL offseason plan series. Today we're looking at the 12th ranked team from the NHL's regular season, the Seattle Kraken. They were a bit of a surprise team this year. Can they build upon that and take it a step further? We'll discuss what moves we'll need to see to make that happen coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're looking at the offseason plan for the Seattle Kraken. They had a surprise season in their second year in the NHL, shocking many people with a real solid regular season result, and of course making the playoffs and winning a round. They accomplished quite a bit this year early in the franchise's history. But what do they have to answer in order to take this a step further? What questions are really facing them here into this critical offseason? So we'll see what happens and what we should expect here momentarily. But first, in case you're new to this series, what we're going to do is recap the year by looking at some key team metrics, take a look at their cap space, what moves we've seen, and look at their internal business for contracts like RFAs, UFAs, and then at the end, address the top burning questions facing the franchise to improve and take things a step forward for next year. So let's get started with recapping last year for the Seattle Kraken. In their second season, as I mentioned, they had a 100-point campaign, which was a major jump in the standings, putting up a record of 46, 28, and 12, 12th overall in the NHL, got themselves into a playoff spot as a wild card, and obviously had themselves quite the regular season improvement. They scored 289 goals, which I think was by far the biggest surprise, with this fourth highest scoring team in the NHL, which is shocking considering that they don't really have a huge name on this team that you expect big numbers from. Now, they did have some breakout seasons from guys like Jared McCann, for example, putting up big numbers, but really that was an anomaly for him. This is not something you'd expect, or, like they were scoring more by committee than they were, led by one or two top scoring players. A lot of teams have, one or two guys that are scoring at high rates, and then a lot of other players are kind of a little bit more league average or what have you not. But the Kraken are kind of built with a lot of players that fall into that average-based category, but they gelled together and made each other better, scoring a lot of goals this past year. Now, they gave up 256, which is kind of what you'd call league average, 15th best, with a goal differential of plus 33. They didn't have the greatest goaltending throughout the season. They did at times, but for the most part, that's an area we're going to discuss. But like I said, the biggest positive surprise was how many goals they were able to score. The power play and penalty kill were not great. They were both below average, but their 5-on-5 play, thankfully, was good enough to get them to where they were. They had a 19.8% success rate on the power play and a 76.7% success rate on the penalty kill, both ranking 21st overall in the NHL. So clearly that needs improvement. Like I said, overall, pretty solid. They made the playoffs. They surprised and shocked and upset in round one, defeating the Stanley Cup champions from last year, the Colorado Avalanche. Lost in round two to the Dallas Stars, but I went to game 7. This team was really one game away from going to the conference final and doing battle with their expansion cousins, the Vegas Golden Knights. It would have been epic to see the two most recent new teams of the NHL meet in the Western Conference final. Unfortunately, Dallas had something to say about that and just barely missed out on making it happen to the Kraken. They had a very quiet NHL trade deadline. They were not a team that went out and really spent a bunch of draft picks or prospects loading up or anything. The team you saw in the playoffs was pretty much the team that you saw throughout the regular season. Now, cap-wise, they have 14 contracts on the books for next year and beyond, totaling $63.15 million, which gives them $20.3 million in available space. That might sound like a lot of money, but when you're carrying, a 22, 23-man roster, that could get used up quickly, and especially considering some of the players that they have to re-sign here. So you're looking at, 8 to 9 contract fitting in under that $20 million and change there. So now let's take a look at that internal business for speaking of. Who are the restricted and unrestricted free agent players that either need to be signed or possibly replaced? The RFA side is led by Vince Dunn, the defenseman, had a breakout season, putting himself up into the upper echelon of offensive D in the league. He's certainly going to command a lot more term and money than he has in the past. He's due for a nice raise. Be curious to see if the Kraken do go on a long-term deal with him. On the RFA side, we also have Will Borgen, Cale Fleury, Morgan Geekie, and Daniel Sprong. I would suspect that the bulk of those players will get qualifying offers Fleury, I'd say maybe not, but I'd say Geeky, Sprong, and Morgan at the very least will be qualified. I'd be surprised if they're not. On the UFA side, you have Ryan Donato, Carson Soucy, the defenseman, of course, who's been mentioned in some trade talk at the deadline last year. They opted to keep him, and we'll see if they re-sign him. Goaltender Marty Jones, Jonas Donskoy as well, who was out for the entire season with injury, and Joey Decord, who's a Group 6 free agent due to the lack of number of games played at the NHL level. So obviously that's going to be a very interesting player to keep your eye on, because they're still going in the American Hockey League. The Coachella Valley Firebirds are vying for a American Hockey League championship, and they're looking really good to possibly win it right now in the finals. So Joey Decord could be a hot topic. And we'll start off the next segment of our video looking at the top burning questions with Decord and others in mind, with how is the goaltending situation going to be addressed here by Ron Francis and the Kraken throughout the season. Of course, they still have Philip Grubauer under contract for 4 more years. Now, he had a much better showing in the playoffs. He has been inconsistent throughout his time in Seattle thus far, but based on what we've seen in the playoffs, I wouldn't think that he would be a goaltender that the Kraken will look to trade. I would suspect that, if anything, he'll be the one certainty to return next year. On the uncertain side, you have goalies like Martin Jones and Joey Decord, who are both UFAs. And they also have Chris Driedger, who was signed to a 3-year contract out of the Florida Panthers organization when they were first expanding. He was their pick from the expansion draft, signed as a UFA in Florida, but he did have a major injury and missed the entire season. So obviously Driedger will be back next year. Now his first year in Seattle, like Grubauer, not the most consistent and not the greatest results, certainly a step down from what he previously accomplished with the Panthers. But what do they do here? To me, Martin Jones is the one thing that I think he likely departs. I think they move on from Jones, and they have to decide if Decord or Driedger is going to be their guy. Now, Joey Decord, of course, is an unrestricted free agent. He does not have to stay and re-sign. That's totally going to be up to him based on what the Kraken decide to offer. But I can say this with certainty, that if they do not re-sign him before free agency starts, he is, to my opinion, going to be a hot commodity. He was their pick in the expansion draft from the Ottawa Senators. He's proven himself to be really nothing left to accomplish at the AHL level. Very mature goalie with a limited amount of NHL games under his belt. I think lots of other teams will look at him as a potential backup option, because I know they can get him fairly cheap, given that he doesn't have a lot of experience at the NHL level yet. I think Decord's decision is going to be based on opportunity more than anything else. And if Seattle's not careful, he could move on. And I would say that he'd be a goalie that I'd be not wanting to give up on. I just think that could be something they regret. So could they move Chris Driedger and sign Joey Decord to go with Grubauer and Decord next year? To me, that would be the smart thing to do. But that is going to be a major question facing this franchise, because if they can't guarantee Decord to be the backup goalie at the NHL level, then one, I don't think he's going to sign, because if he's not, they're going to have to put him on waivers again, and I don't see him getting through waivers another time. They've been lucky so far, and after likely being a potential playoff MVP and Calder Cup champion, I just don't see that happening. If he goes into training camp next year and has to go on waivers again, he's going to get plucked by another team. Dunn's contract extension is going to be a big question as well. Obviously put up 64 points, going to need a big raise, likely looking for a lot of term. So I think that the likelihood that they look after him and make him their highest paid defenseman is very, very likely. But he's not the only contract extension they need to take care of here. They could look at extensions, because now, of course, he's a restricted free agent, so he needs a contract. These other players are eligible because they're entering their final year, including veteran Jordan Eberle, youngster Ellie Tolvanen, who was a nice pickup on waivers from Nashville, and of course, youngster Matty Beniers. Now, in the case of Beniers, I wouldn't be shocked if they let it play out. I mean, he and his agent may want to see how things go this year before they sign, because if he has another big year, he might be able to command even more money. Hard to say how Tolvanen feels about things, because he'll also be restricted. So, again, no big rush, but I'd be curious to see how they handle those scenarios going into the offseason. We could see deals for them. Of course, like I said before, their special teams do need some improvement. They need power play and penalty kill improvement. They could do that in a variety of ways. I don't know if they'll make any adjustments on player personnel or on the coaching strategy. You got to wonder, there's some higher profile scorers out there. Would they want to get a guy like Alex DeBrincat, for example, out of Ottawa, who's, expected to be dealt? Would they have the pieces to put together to intrigue him to come to Seattle and sign a longer term deal? Obviously, he can be a huge help to their power play. Now, what they'd have to give up to get him might be too costly. That may not be a move they want to make. Or do the other thing is, do they look at maybe improving their defense? If they get themselves a real solid two-way defender who could be, another version of Vince Dunn, for example, who could maybe even be better defending, they could also help with the offense on the power play, and they could also help defend, which will help on the PK too, right? So hard to say how they go about doing things here, but they have some money. I mean, $20 million, but they said if depending on what Vince Dunn gets for money, and then a few other smaller signings, Carson Soucy maybe, they need a goalie, it's going to go away pretty quickly. So they have to be very careful here. They may have, maybe consider swapping out, if they can, maybe make a couple of trades to improve their bottom six to get maybe another one or two guys that are, a little stronger at killing penalties. But again, that's, to me, it's a unique scenario, right? The reason the power play is not better, in my opinion, is that they just don't have much on their team in terms of game breakers. But they had a really balanced team where on any given night, you can have a different hero, different line producing the offense, and that's all fine and dandy, but then you're constantly rejuggling your power play. You don't have those consistent, top 20, 30 NHL scorers that are always out there on power play one, putting up the points. So it's difficult to say how they go. I honestly think that the way they are a balanced team, collaboration approach here of the scoring might be difficult to keep up. They're going to have to analyze that. I know they're a very analytical team, but it might be challenging to maintain that kind of status, because look at all the number of players that it requires to be all kind of going here. If you have even a few players regress, that's going to take enough goals out of the equation that it could really hurt, and you could find yourselves in a lot more tighter games. You're not outscoring your opponents, and if your D's not better, then you're going to run into problems. You could regress next year. So hard to say how they go about things, but I think they either need a game-breaking forward to add to the power play to make that better. They could also use, like I said, it doesn't have to be a big flashy player, but it could be, just somebody on the D side or on the fourth line who's a real solid penalty killer, just to improve things there. If they can get that penalty kill up from, almost 77% closer to 80, and they can get that power play up even, another 0.5% and be like a 20.4, 20.3, that's a huge difference. Those number of goals add up over the course of the season, or in case of the PK, decrease on that side of it, that, you're going to be even better. It should be able to secure yourself another playoff spot, as long as everything else tends to go right here. But we'll see what happens. That's my expectations for the team. Let me know what yours are down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.